And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again across the Louisiana plain, where we are elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism in Louisiana, elevating the cause of constitutional conservative citizens across the state, and rapidly now draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom, brought to you by freedom-loving Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. Thank you for inviting us to be part of your day. We are so grateful for you. You're the best listening family anyone could possibly hope for, and we are only here because of your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you are looking for a way to support us, to advertise with us, or to send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd really appreciate it if you'd also help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom. Please like the show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it, and share it. You can share short clips instead of the full episodes from our YouTube and Rumble channels, and links to those are always in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. We are so honored to be affiliate partners for General Michael Flynn's movie, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. The DVD can be purchased from several popular retailers, and he's on tour screening and promoting the film. If you'd like to support General Flynn and the State of Freedom, visit freedomstate.us to get your copy of the DVD, to buy Flynn movie merchandise, or purchase tickets to a live screening. Our affiliate link is also in the show notes. We are so pleased to have Dr. Meryl Nass returning to the show today to talk to us about the latest developments with the W.H.O. treaties and the bird flu scam and other scams that are flying around the narrative. Before we bring on Dr. Nass, let me read the scripture of the day. It's Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. And it says, "Don't be pulled in different directions or worried about a thing. Be saturated in prayer throughout each day, offering your faith-filled requests before God with overflowing gratitude. Tell him every detail of your life. Then God's wonderful peace that transcends human understanding will guard your heart and mind through Jesus Christ. Keep your thoughts continually fixed on all that is authentic and real, honorable and admirable, beautiful and respectful, pure and holy, merciful and kind. And fasten your thoughts on every glorious work of God, praising him always." This is such a grounding scripture. I know, at least for us, the last few weeks, and especially even the last few days of this legislative session, have been more demanding than I anticipated. And, it's right when we expect things to be winding down that new challenges and surprises show up that need quick and strategic responses, immediate responses. And it can be so easy to feel like we're being pulled in different directions. And we can really lose our peace when we focus on our problems, on the problems that arise, on the never-ending to-do list, and on our need to act instead of focusing on the Lord and his sufficiency to bring us through all those things and to give us the energy to get them done. So this scripture is a great reminder to me to keep focused on the Lord, on truth, on his faithfulness, and all that he has accomplished already and all that he is accomplishing. I know that as we focus on him, he will calm our hearts and our minds. He will fill us with his wonderful peace. And this passage is also a great reminder to me to not get so wrapped up in the work that I neglect to celebrate the victories and give God the glory, because, celebration is an act of worship.
It's such an important reminder, Danielle, to stop momentarily and celebrate good victories that God has blessed us with, through hard work. It is, but sometimes it's very difficult because the tendency is to move on to the next task and the next one and the next one. But it's so important.
And there's always a next one.
And there's always a next one. But it is so important to be able to stop for a moment and just thank God for the victories. You're exactly right. And to keep our focus on him and to give him glory. And speaking of what we believe is a victory, and probably in large part due to the efforts of our guest today, Dr. Meryl Nass, who is on the show with us today. We'll talk about it. Dr. Nass, thank you for joining us again on the State of Freedom.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here.
Is it safe to say, Dr. Nass, that with regard to this WHO treaty that we have narrowly evaded the sword of Damocles?
I wouldn't say that we've evaded it forever, but what happened last week is that, as you know, I'm glad you picked the passage you did from Philippians, because this whole process has been designed to confuse everyone. And so the processes that were going on last week and this week are similarly designed to keep us all confused. What happened is that there were two documents instead of one. It would have made much more sense to have one document, but they chose to have two with very different ways each one could be passed. One required a 2/3 vote, one required a 50% vote, one was an opt-in, one was an opt-out, blah, blah, blah. So nobody could keep track of what was going on, and there were 9 drafts of one and 3 drafts of the other. In any event, after all of that and a 2-year process and continually extending the deadline for when these documents needed to be finished and negotiated by about 40 people from different countries and stakeholders, so-called stakeholders, which means people from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation,
Right.
for instance.
Yep.
Last Friday was the absolute end deadline after many deadlines, because the meeting at which these documents were hoped to be voted on and passed started on this Monday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. So on Friday, the nations had not gotten to consensus on either document. They had not completed them, and that was a very, very, very good thing. So we dodged the first bullet there. Now, what the WHO is trying to do is to find some way of continuing the negotiations and moving this forward. What they have lost as a result of this 2-year process is they've lost the element of stealth and surprise. So they were trying to basically pull a fast one on the people of the world by creating documents that would allow the WHO to develop its own laboratories, to supervise gain of function research, to share potential pandemic pathogens, which are biological warfare agents, if you want to call them that, around the world, and basically encourage accidents, encourage more pandemics. A lot of the money that comes into WHO, because 85% is donations, not dues, a lot of that money comes from pharma or organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that are invested in pharmaceutical companies. So they're looking forward to an era of pandemics and rapidly rolled out unlicensed, untested vaccines. That's their plan for the next 10 years. Of course, the people in the world don't want that. These documents were trying to pull all that through by requiring nations to agree legally to this rapid rollout of unlicensed, untested vaccines, to take away liability from those products. So if they injure you or kill you, nobody could go to court to try to get any benefits. And the WHO wanted to control health information. They wanted the ability to mandate vaccines and drugs on us whenever they called a public health emergency, etc. They haven't been able to get any of that through. What they've gotten agreement on is a few items that are not nearly as worrisome, and they've alerted the world of what they were up to. So I think that they won't be able to go ahead and get these kinds of horrible provisions through in future, unless we let down our guard. But as long as we're watching them, they're not going to be able to make it. Now, they have a plan B, which is going to the UN in September and trying to give the same kinds of powers that the Director General of WHO was seeking to the Secretary General of the UN, who is his name is Guterres. However, we're watching, so they're probably not going to be able to get that through the UN either. But we'll have to see. All the effort has been made so far at the level of the WHO.
How important, Dr. Nass, was, you emphasize the element of stealth and surprise. I couldn't agree with you more. There's no question that that's what they were trying to do, to sneak all this stuff through in the cover of darkness, the cover of night. But that opportunity now is gone, isn't it?
I believe it is. We're kind of in the twilight zone here, because half the world is acknowledging that a terrible crime or series of crimes have been perpetrated on us, where we've been exposed to COVID, a biological weapon. We don't know if it escaped or if it was pushed out of a lab. We've been given dangerous, toxic, poisonous vaccines. Drugs that would have helped us have been withheld. And we've been told a series of lies about all this while people are dying. So for 4.5 years, we've gone through, it's like we stepped into the Twilight Zone, where what's true becomes false, what's false becomes true, and we don't know what they're going to do to us next. Now, I actually, having done that introduction, I forgot what
Well,
your
let me
question
ask you
was.
this. No, you just affirmed what I was saying. Dr. Nass, what do you think? Obviously, this is tremendous news to us. Great, great news, cause for celebration. Obviously, your organization and you personally had a lot to do with raising worldwide awareness of these draconian efforts, really to impose tyranny on the world, which is what you did. What do you believe were the main factors, the main impediments that were put in place that caused this treaty to fail?
Well, I think nobody knew what was in the documents. I think that was number one. Is you had to read about 80 or 90 pages of legalese, and you had to be able to interpret it. And so I think that was really hard. There were very few people who were qualified or interested enough to do that. And I just by chance happened to be one of the people who's worked in biological warfare and biological defense for 35 years. So when they start talking about pathogens that are transmissibility and virulence, I know what that means. That means gain of function. Not everybody knows that. I worked with a coalition. I was an important member, the science member of a coalition that fought against anthrax vaccine mandates 20 to 25 years ago. And so I had to read legal documents and FDA documents and CDC documents a lot over a number of years and participate in legal cases. And we actually did get the license revoked for the anthrax vaccine for a period of time until FDA gave it back. So I had basically the scientific, medical, and enough legal knowledge to be able to read the documents, understand them, and then because I was also a practicing doctor, I know how to talk to people in plain language rather than in academic language. And I think that those things were very important, was interpreting the documents. And I had a wonderful team of 15 or 20 other people at Door to Freedom. Almost everyone was a volunteer who were willing to write about the Great Reset, talk about what's going on, create all sorts of documents. We had graphic designers, videographers who made materials, content it's called now, so that we built a website. We had volunteers build the website. We now have a paid webmaster, but she gives us a break. And then we hired networkers who could try to push the information out to countries around the world as well as our own. We also joined forces with lots of other organizations, including the Sovereignty Coalition, Children's Health Defense, which I was already involved with, National Vaccine Information Center, which I was already, an advisor to both of those, Stand for Health Freedom, and other groups. And then groups in Europe as well. So our European networker was able to work with activists in Europe. And then I and my colleague Philip Cruz, who is a Swiss attorney, spoke at about 8 different parliaments in Europe, including the European Parliament. And so we were able to connect with minority parties throughout Europe and then help them connect to each other.
What a
So
what a
it was a
network.
long
Yeah,
process.
what a network, Dr. Nass. What an undertaking. What a network that you've built. This is like a David and Goliath story to us, the way that you were able to build and expand, because that is, the World Health Organization, make no mistake about it, in conjunction with the UN and all that, extraordinarily powerful international organization. And to be able to have stopped this in its tracks is such a credit to you and to all of your hard work, and obviously the hard work of many, many others in getting this information out. There was a letter that was sent by, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, 49, 50 maybe members of the U.S. Senate to the Biden administration, essentially saying that you need to back off of this because this is dead on arrival in the U.S. Senate. Dr. Nass, do you think that that letter, which was a pretty strong one from the U.S. Senate, had something to do with how this turned out?
Absolutely. I think so. That letter, every Republican senator, 49 senators, wrote to Joe Biden and said, you should stop negotiating this now, but if you don't, and you go along with it, you need to put it in front of the Senate for ratification. And by the way, ratification would fail because it requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate. That happened May 1. On May 8, 22 U.S. attorney generals, all Republicans, wrote to Biden and said, we don't like this. This is taking away sovereignty from our states. We have responsibility for healthcare at the state level because of the 10th Amendment. And we don't plan to enforce or allow these orders to be rolled out in our state. On May 22nd, 24 governors wrote to Joe Biden and said, basically, we are the top officer of our state. You don't have authority over healthcare. We do. And we're not turning it over to you, and we're not going along. So that was huge because think of it. Not only, we're basically almost half the states in the country, now 24 states in the U.S., say, even if these WHO documents get passed and signed off on by the Biden administration, we're not allowing them to be implemented in our states. So that's critical. Citizens in 24 states will be protected. But what's bigger is that the rest of the world heard that and they realized that the United States, who had been pushing these documents, we were the initiators of this process. They realized that there was some serious conflict here, and that even if the Biden administration got them through in Geneva and even got them through at the national level, that at least half the country would be able to opt out. And then if they looked at, actually, the United States had made reservations the last time the international health regulations had been modified. So in 2005, so one of these documents is an existing document called the International Health Regulations. It was modified in 2005. And at that time, the United States had added, when it signed on, it said, look, the states have some authority for healthcare. And so we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to go along with what you tell us because the states may have jurisdiction. In that case, we'll just advise them to go along, but we can't guarantee it. So that was very interesting. That was an acknowledgement by the federal government that the states, in fact, did have significant jurisdiction over healthcare. And so, the other nations, the other 193 nations of the WHO are looking and saying, wow, the United States already gave itself an opt-out. They want us to go along with this binding document, but they've given themselves a pass. And now half the country doesn't want it. Why should we go along with it?
Yeah. And Dr. Nass, you had mentioned that your colleague was in Switzerland and traveled around Europe speaking to different parliaments. Several countries in Europe did end up rejecting the treaty outright, did they? I think Switzerland was at the top of that list.
No, Slovakia was at the top of the list. And a few days later, an assassination attempt was made on the Slovakian prime minister, who has been in the hospital ever since and almost died.
Yeah, nothing to see there.
Iran had been one country that rejected, and the president and foreign minister of Iran died in a helicopter crash about 2 weeks ago. The Dutch parliament instructed the health minister to either delay or say no, and then the health minister said, sorry, we're going to say yes. And so there was a tussle in the Dutch parliament last week. Finally, they got the health minister to say, we won't say yes and we won't say no. Basically, we'll abstain. But that just goes to show you that our governments, that at high levels, the leaders of many governments are totally controlled. And even to the point that they won't obey their own parliaments. And that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, clearly their lives are on the line.
Yes. Yes. Belarus is the other European country that yesterday or the day before, I think on Tuesday, said basically, "Oh yeah, we're interested in continuing to negotiate these documents, etc. But we don't go along with this, and we don't go along with that, and we don't think all these pandemic pathogens should be shared freely, etc." So Belarus, which is allied with Russia, said no very clearly, and it was like a breath of fresh air because all of these countries talk in a language that is not plain, that is a flowery, oh, we love this and we love that, and it's all wonderful, blah, blah. And you don't know what they really mean. But Belarus was just right there saying, hey, this is no good, that's no good, this is no good, we're not going along.
It sounds, Dr. Nass, like this really came down to a sovereignty issue. I know the letter that the U.S. senators sent, the centerpiece of the letter was, this is an abdication of our sovereignty. We're simply not willing to do that. And it sounds like perhaps the spirit of the resistance to this treaty really was member nations looking at this and saying, this is a violation of our sovereignty. This is a violation of our jurisdictional authority. And in the final analysis, we're just not prepared to cede our sovereignty to an international health organization. That may be an oversimplification, but it sounds to me like one of the centerpieces of the resistance was the unwillingness to abdicate sovereignty.
Absolutely. This is such an interesting question because for most countries, it's illegal, or it seems to be illegal, to cede sovereignty to some other entity, particularly one controlled by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and its ilk. So what happened was the WHO tried very hard to deny that this was a sovereignty grab by lying about it and by placing a paragraph into the treaty saying we would never take sovereignty away from anyone. That's not our intention. Every nation can maintain its own blah blah. But in fact, if you actually read the rest of the documents, they're clearly taking away sovereignty. If the WHO can tell you what laws you have to pass, what drugs you're allowed to have, what vaccines you have to mandate, what information.
That's a sovereignty issue. That's a sovereignty issue. And speaking of a sovereignty issue, Dr. Nass, on pre-show, you mentioned another state in the United States that had passed some legislation to severely restrict the authority of the WHO in their state. And we're happy to report here something that perhaps you may already know. SB 133, Danielle, am I correct in saying that SB 133, Thomas Presley anti-WHO bill, has now been signed by our governor?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. 2 days ago, Jeff Landry, a hero for Missouri and Louisiana v. Biden, a wonderful guy, signed that bill. So the citizens of Louisiana are protected for, going into the future, probably forever, from the WHO.
And you were talking pre-show about Oklahoma, where there's some similar legislation working its way through the system. Any other states that you know of that are pushing legislation through to diminish the authority of the WHO in their states?
Yes. So Oklahoma had passed a bill almost identical to your Louisiana bill about 3 weeks ago in the House, and then for some reason Republicans in the Senate blocked it. And so it was stuck, and it looked like it wasn't going anywhere. And then a big push was made. Frank Gaffney flew out to Oklahoma. There was a big rally at the State House, and a lot of calls were made to senators and reps. And finally, the two Republican senators who were blocking it let it go forward. It went forward yesterday. I'm told it passed the Senate at a very, like 5-1 or something yesterday. Today is the last day of the Oklahoma session. It needs to go back to the House where it had passed easily before because of an amendment. And then we'll go to the governor, who is one of the signers of a letter to Biden. So there will be no problem there. So the citizens of Oklahoma will be protected, as you are, from the WHO, the UN, and the jurisdiction of the World Economic
Beautiful.
Forum going forward.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And hopefully next session more states will do the same thing. There are several other states that have had bills, I think passed in Tennessee and Alabama, that basically asked the president to, get out of this business. So they were resolutions and they weren't bills. So although the meaning of them was the same, they did not have the same
They
force.
certainly made their feelings known.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. Get to shopping, that helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information. Dr. Nass, maybe to switch gears a little bit, back to the World Health Assembly and the treaties. I find the timing of the World Health Assembly and the sharp increase in the narrative around the bird flu to be really, really suspect. When you were last on the podcast, you talked about the bird flu being a complete scam. Would you break down for us what the lies are and what we should be doing in response to this?
Okay, so the first issue is, what is the bird flu even a natural disease or is it a lab made disease? And the Organic Consumers Association has said that it actually looks like a lab made virus, that there were bits of duck and goose and chicken in it. Now, that's Alex Baden-Mayer, and I recommend people read her article. It's quite well done. I myself have not dived into that area, so I don't know if it was originally a lab made virus or not. But at one point, 20 years ago, it was discovered about 27 years ago. About 20 years ago, it was deadly but very rare. It would spread from chickens to people occasionally, and if someone was diagnosed with the virus, they had about 50-60% chance of dying. That changed. The virus has mutated. It is no longer dangerous to humans. There have been 3 cases in the United States ever in the history of the world, and 2 of them had pink eye, and 1 reported fatigue for 4 days. So it's not, and nobody's dying. The WHO worked very hard to try to find a death from bird flu this year, and they came up with someone who was on their last legs, who was then alleged to have bird flu and died, who had multi-organ failure or something already. So bird flu is not a problem. Now, is it a problem if you eat the meat from a bird that had bird flu? No, if you cook the meat, there's no problem. In fact, probably if you eat the meat raw, there's no problem because nobody's gotten it. But what has happened in the last 2 years is that nearly 200 million birds have been killed, destroyed, because one chicken in a chicken house had a PCR test that was positive for bird flu in the US or in Europe. So there's been lots of media about bird flu, and in some of the media, what they're basically doing is lying and pretending that it's still a disease that kills 50% of the people that get it, when it kills nobody anymore. And Jeremy Farrar, who was the person most responsible probably for covering up the origin of COVID, for helping Tony Fauci publish the Proximal Origins article that insisted COVID was a naturally occurring virus, not a lab-made virus. He is one of the co-founders of this whole bird flu thing, and he also was responsible for overdose trials, which killed how many people? Something like, I think, 2,600 people in the trials, and killed about 500 of them from overdosing them with hydroxychloroquine. He was involved with setting up those clinical trials at the beginning of COVID. And now he's been moved to the WHO because he's the founder of an organization, CEPI, with Bill Gates, to create vaccines in 100 days, manufacture them in 30 more days, and then roll them out to the whole country and
What
have
a
Wow.
sick
every
Dr.
person.
Nass, are you, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. This gentleman that you just mentioned, he was overdosing people on hydroxychloroquine so that he could then come and say that hydroxychloroquine is contraindicated for the treatment of COVID.
correct.
So he did.
That's
So you're
exactly
saying
right.
he deliberately killed people simply so he could create the narrative that hydroxychloroquine shouldn't be used for the treatment of COVID?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
That's just
Holy
absolutely
smokes.
evil.
He's a physician as well. But his boss was the former head of MI6. Um, his boss at the Wellcome Trust, Dame Manningham Bueller, had just left being the head of MI6, which is kind of like the CIA of England. And then she became the chairman of the board of, she joined the board and then became the chairman of the Wellcome Trust, where he was the CEO. So I think he's probably been directed by intelligence. I mean, how does he wind up, being a discoverer of bird flu, pushing that whole fear narrative for the last 20 years? Then he overdoses people with hydroxychloroquine, and then he gets involved with 100-day vaccines. He covers up the COVID coming from a lab, and now he's there to push the
Yeah.
WHO agenda. I mean,
Wow.
that doesn't happen
It's hard
naturally.
to
No, it
understand. It's hard
doesn't.
to understand, Danielle and Dr. Nass, how anybody could conclude that this guy has any credibility whatsoever at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeremy Farrar, Sir Jeremy Farrar, MD.
Dr. Nass, you mentioned before we came on the show that bird flu is not the only scare tactic being driven. What are some of the other possible vectors of pandemic that are being floated right now?
Yeah. So dengue is one. And by the way, so dengue, bird flu, and monkeypox, which are the three big ones in the Western Hemisphere, all remarkably have had vaccines licensed in the last few years.
Shocking.
Yeah. Shocking.
Okay, so dengue was a very rare disease in the Western Hemisphere. It was an Asian disease. Then it came into Cuba, but nowhere else, twice in, I think, the 1970s. And Cuba alleged that the United States had unleashed it on them, and they had about 200 babies die as a result. Cuba alleged a lot of different about half a dozen different biological warfare events that they thought the U.S. had initiated. One was against was African swine fever against their pigs. They had to kill half a million pigs for a country of 10 million people in around 1971. And they also alleged that there were pests against their crops, so their crops failed as a result. Anyway, oh, where was I going with? So anyway, dengue had only been in Cuba, but now dengue is in Latin America, and it's come up here as far north as Florida, Puerto Rico, a little bit in Texas, and a few cases in Hawaii, of all places. Now, and there is a dengue vaccine. The dengue vaccine, unfortunately, killed a bunch of kids in Philippines when it was initially rolled out there around 8 years ago, and it wasn't properly um, the legal issues for testing and going through regulation were not done. There was some bribery, and people, I think the Minister of Health and people who worked for the Sanofi pharmaceutical company went on trial for manslaughter or murder in Philippines because of this same dengue vaccine. In order to try and avoid those complications, it was rolled out by our government in Puerto Rico, but they said, well, we don't want it to kill kids, and so we have to test them to see if they've already had dengue, because if they did, they blah blah blah, they shouldn't get the vaccine. So they created a program where you had to be tested before you got the vaccine. Of course, that might work in the beginning, but after a while, the nurses don't know, they don't understand, and people wind up getting the vaccine without being tested. So, and and the vaccine is now being used in other nations. So are they testing first? Who knows? But okay, so that's dengue, and so there was a massive outbreak in Paraguay, southern Argentina, of dengue this past year.
And Dr. Nass, maybe those are some of the same people that are crossing into our wide open border as well. Maybe, I mean,
Yeah, certainly could be. You need you need an insect vector, but absolutely, these are possibilities. So the last one is monkey, and so there is a bird flu vaccine. So there are 3 bird flu vaccines that have been licensed in the United States. The most recent one licensed about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And even though bird flu is not causing any human problems, unfortunately, the criminal FDA has said they're going to get ready to roll it out at any minute, and they're encouraging manufacturers to start, building up their supplies, millions of doses. All right. The last one is monkeypox. We thought that went away. No. Apparently, the powers that be decided that Pride Month and Pride events are coming up, and that this is a great way to educate and encourage the gay or bisexual population to get monkeypox vaccines. So they have rolled them out on the West Coast in San Francisco, the Seattle, Oregon areas, and they're encouraging kids down to the age of 5 to be vaccinated for monkeypox. Again, this is a vaccine, didn't work in monkeys, and the CDC did a clinical trial in the Congo of this vaccine in 100 healthcare workers, and they've never told us what the results are. So the vaccine probably doesn't work, but it does cause myocarditis. It does cause elevation of cardiac enzymes. We don't know how frequent that is because CDC won't release any data and FDA won't. But it's a dangerous vaccine. It probably doesn't work, and nobody should get the monkeypox vaccine.
and is monkeypox a sexually transmitted disease?
It didn't used to be. It was a minor disease in the United States, equivalent to shingles. You would get a little pustule or several pustules on your skin where you got the disease. It was similar to chickenpox, but you didn't get as many pustules. And then the virus would grow in the pustule. And if you were having sex in an area where there was a pustule, you would come down. You could come down with the disease. There were a few people who wound up in the hospital in the U.S., but it was for pain control. It wasn't because the disease was severe, but if you had a lesion in your penis or around your anus, it could cause severe spasm of the anal sphincter, or it could cause severe burning in the penis when you try to pee. So people would go in the hospital to get pain control until the virus resolved, which would, take a week, 1 week to 4 weeks. And then you'd probably be immune for life. And the FDA is not recommending anyone who's had the disease to be vaccinated. So,
do you recommend, Dr. Nass, anybody, any healthy person getting any of these vaccines that you just talked about?
No, there's no good data to show safety or efficacy for any of the 3 of them. I think you need to be insane. What you really need in terms of dengue, and in terms of, so for dengue, you use bug spray. If you go to a place where dengue is, active, there are some very good bug sprays now that will protect you. For monkeypox, you use a condom, of course. That may not protect you everywhere, but if you're not having sex with, someone who is at risk, who is gay or bisexual, there's certainly no reason to be worried about it. And as far as the bird flu goes, that just seems to be completely made up. There should be no concerns about bird flu at all, unless we've always got the problem, what are they cooking up in labs? And are they going to unleash a new one on us?
Yeah. Now, we all know what happened, Dr. Nass, back in 2020 with the COVID and with all of the political implications of that, the lockdowns, the mail-in ballots, and everything that happened in the 2020 election. What do you foresee regarding any attempt to lock us down or the imposition of any emergency vaccines between now and the presidential election that could affect that election?
I don't think any of these 3 are going to be sufficient to lock us down. I think it would have to be something new. I agree with you. That's probably what the powers that be, at least in the Biden administration, are hoping for. But monkeypox, right now in the U.S. it's a sexually transmitted disease. It wasn't in Africa. Bird flu, it's a nothing. And dengue is a sorry, not monkey, a mosquito transmitted disease. So if you're not in November, there probably most of the country there won't be any mosquitoes. We should be okay. But who know? This is an era of pandemics, is what the WHO and what some of the powers that be want. They want to control us. They want to be able to vaccinate us with whatever they come up with, and they are capable of unleashing.
Yeah, so I guess we have to be on guard and ever vigilant about it, because look, we've made no bones about our political leanings here. We definitely would like to see President Trump reelected, and from our perspective, it looks as though Biden is just hemorrhaging support across the country. They appear to be desperate, and desperate people sometimes do very, very desperate things. And I just want to make sure that we are ever vigilant. And I suspect you would recommend that as well.
Well, we can be vigilant, but what we need is to have people like Fauci in jail.
Yes, I would agree with you.
And we need to shut down the labs. And I'm afraid that only Bobby Kennedy understands this problem and would be able to actually shut down these gain of function labs and end this whole biological warfare business. Unfortunately, Trump still loves his vaccines.
Yeah.
And he could be potentially, conned into rolling out more and more vaccines on us.
Yeah, Dr. Nass, that is a possibility. I think that he has been, whether he admits it publicly or not, I think that he has been educated on the issue. I certainly would like to think that he has been. You notice that he doesn't really talk about it too much anymore. He certainly does not lead with anything related to vaccines. So I would like to think that he's been educated on it. I will agree with you that Robert F. Kennedy has masterful knowledge on these issues and has really, really expressed very articulately all the problems with these vaccines and with the lockdowns. And of course, with Dr. Fauci himself, who absolutely should be in prison. I agree.
Along with his cohort, it sounds like. Dr. Nass, what action would you encourage our listeners to take to stand their ground against all of this, other than the obvious of don't take the vaccines?
Well, if they live in a state outside of Louisiana, they should encourage their state legislators to pass a bill like yours that denies jurisdiction, that says, look, we're not going to obey any orders from the WHO, the UN, and the World Economic Forum. That's it. Going forward, they can't tell us anything. I mean, I think that's critically important. They also need to educate all their lawmakers at the state and federal level that we don't like this. We don't want pandemics. Get rid of the gain of function. Get rid of these biolabs. This whole idea is crazy. You've done us enough damage. Stop it. We're not interested in your great reset or your build back better.
Yeah. Yes. We are not interested
Exactly.
in your Build Back Better. Go take your Build Back Better somewhere else. Please, Joe, please. Well, Dr. Nass, as always, thank you for all of your efforts on this. You're very, very humble. No question that you were very instrumental in what we can only conclude was a profound success with regard to halting this WHO agreement. As I said at the beginning, it really is a David and Goliath story from our view. And one that is just for the history books, really. And it's a privilege now for the second time to have had you on the show. And we look forward to visiting again with you very soon. Thank you for all your work.
Great. Thank you for your consistent, solid work as well. I really appreciate it.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Nass.
And let me just say at the very end, what keeps me going is being grateful. Grateful to God, grateful to you, grateful to everybody who sees where we need to go, where we don't need to go, and is doing something about it. We have a lot to be grateful for. in this world. And we've just dodged one bullet. We've got a few more we have to dodge, but we're in good shape to do that.
We are, and we live to fight another day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. People are seeing what the problem is now for the first time.
Yeah. And in no small part because of your work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take good care.
You too. Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.